He's magnificent. He's more like an enhanced animal, living off instinct.
Not animal.
What? The open mic. He's listening to the Wrangler's headset.
Not animal. I am a man. You did this to me. You hurt me.
Shut him down.
Coming for you.
Terminate Weapon X.
Hey there guys, Nordic Warrior here, welcome back to my video game review series. So those of you who have been following my channel will know that recently, I've been reviewing several fighting games in the X-Men series. In my last video I reviewed X-Men Next Dimension. For the next part of the series we're going to be looking at some of the more recent X-Men games. Today we're going to be looking at X2 Wolverine's Revenge, released in 2003, developed by Genepool Software. So Wolverine's Revenge is an interesting game for several reasons. And right off the bat, it's a childhood favourite of mine. I remember being so hyped for it when it first came out. However, it's also a game that I have several mixed feelings on. Just like the original Mutant Academy game, which was a tie-in for the first X-Men movie. This game is technically a tie-in for the X-Men 2 movie that came out alongside it. And taking a look at the game's overall marketing, you would assume that it was based specifically on the movie. Particularly since it has X2 in the title. And if you look at the box art, it has a picture of Hugh Jackman on the cover, who of course played Wolverine in the movie. However, despite this, aside from some bonus features, the game has nothing to do with the movie whatsoever, and it instead has its own original story, inspired by some of the X-Men comics. This makes sense since it means that they didn't have to just copy the events of the movie, and they could give us something more interesting, and in my opinion they certainly did. Also, despite Hugh Jackman being on the cover, he doesn't provide the voice for Wolverine. Instead, Wolverine is voiced by Mark Hamill.
You know, there aren't many airlines that will let a passenger sit up front, Mr. Logan.
Don't see as there's much choice, darling. The cargo bay being full of beer and this being the only seat.
Hamill does an excellent job as the character, and he really does his best to add some charm and charisma to the game. And it makes the character so much more likeable than a phoned-in performance from Hugh Jackman would have been. It's a bit of a shame that he never voiced Wolverine again after this, since I really do think that his voice suited the character, but I digress. The game is a third-person action-adventure hack-and-slash, with some basic stealth mechanics here and there. The story of the game is a pretty interesting one. The game begins with an intro that shows Wolverine being kidnapped and taken to the Weapon X facility.
So what's it gonna be, Logan? The easy way or the hard way?
I messed up, so what? There was no reason to do what they did. No reason at all.
You always were a chump, Logan.
You start the game with a flashback mission where you have to escape the Weapon X facility. Wolverine will have to cut his way through hordes of soldiers and twisted Weapon X abominations to find the Professor, who had him kidnapped and gave him his adamantium skeleton. Upon escaping the facility and finding the Professor, Wolverine is informed that he's been infected with a disease called the Shiva virus. However, he also learns, due to his mutant healing factor, that the virus isn't able to finish him off as quickly as usual. The game then skips to the present day, where Wolverine is being given a checkup by Beast, who informs him that the virus has mutated to bypass his healing factor. And worse, he estimates that he only has 2 days to live.
2 days? That's my birthday. Ain't that a kick in the head?
Our estimates could be wrong.
Maybe you ought to give me my presents now.
This leads to Professor Xavier, who is voiced by Patrick Stewart, reprising his role from the movie, sending Wolverine back to the Weapon X facility to find a cure. Wolverine will have to traverse various levels, retracing his steps, fighting enemies and hunting for clues to the whereabouts of a potential cure. The game is basically split up into several acts, each act covering a different facility connected to Wolverine's past. Most of the game consists of combat, as you might expect from a Wolverine game. The game actually has a pretty complex and nuanced combat system, and it isn't just a generic hack and slash. One interesting feature is that you can choose to retract Wolverine's claws at any time. There are a few reasons for this. The game has a lock-on system, where Wolverine will lock onto one enemy at a time. This allows you to focus your attacks on one enemy, while circling around them like you would in a boxing match, landing blows and avoiding your enemy's attacks. You can strike enemies by either kicking or punching. With the claws out, your strikes do significantly more damage, however they're much slower, which is why it may be more effective to retract your claws and throw punches against certain enemies to build momentum. There are various combinations to try, and you can even block certain enemy attacks by moving backwards, and you can also jump over enemies and attack them from behind. Enemies in the game vary in their toughness and durability, as well as their skill in combat. You actually get quite a bit of enemy variety. Some enemies rely mostly on ranged attacks such as guns, as well as some more futuristic weapons. Others rely mostly on melee attacks. If you manage to stun an enemy, you can perform a finishing move. These moves consist of either grabbing an enemy and throwing them, or beating them into submission, or swiftly taking them out in style. This feature also helps when taking on multiple enemies at once, which can be very challenging since it's quite easy to get overwhelmed, and it's very difficult to defend yourself against multiple attackers at once. If you're able to line up multiple enemies at a certain distance, you can perform a strike move to take them all out at once. These moves look pretty badass. It's wise to fight defensively and tactfully, and attack enemies from behind and look for openings. The combat is very challenging, but once you get used to it and figure out how to exploit the AI a bit, it's manageable, for the most part. More on the game's difficulty later. In one of the game's later levels, you fight enemies who are immune to your claw attacks, and you will have to use regular melee attacks to defeat them. Wolverine also has a rage meter that fills up as you engage in combat, and once this fills up you can enter rage mode. This way your attacks do significantly more damage to enemies, and you can even take out several of the more tough enemies in one hit. This can really bail you out in some difficult fights, so use it well. In addition to the combat, which takes up the majority of the game also has some stealth sections. In these sections you often have to sneak around facilities and complete various objectives, preferably without raising the alarm. You can sneak up on enemies and perform a stealth takedown. This can be quite difficult to do on occasion, since the AI is quite sensitive and there is very little room for error. Speaking of room for error, there are even sections of the game where you instantly fail if you get caught. These are very annoying. There's a level where you have to sneak into a mutant prison called the Void while wearing a disguise. However, sadly the stealth in that level only lasts a few minutes. Then you are forced into combat. Some of you are probably wondering why a character like Wolverine, who is a tough guy with adamantium claws and a healing factor, would even need to worry about stealth. Well, in this game it makes sense since Wolverine is somewhat weakened due to being infected with the Shiva virus. This serves as an excuse for the game's difficulty, and it adds an overall feeling of urgency, since the game constantly reminds you that Wolverine only has a couple of days to live, and is running out of time. You do have a healing factor in the game. While not in combat, Wolverine's health will heal back slowly, so if your health is low, it's wise to wait around for your health to fill up before moving on to the next area. The healing factor doesn't work while your claws are out, and it doesn't work while in rage mode. So bear this in mind while you're traversing the game and approaching enemies. Another ability Wolverine has is his enhanced senses. There are certain areas of the game where there will be certain hazards that are invisible to you, and by activating Wolverine's senses, you will be able to see where the hazards are and avoid them. Hazards such as landmines and lasers. This adds another element of challenge and a bit of variety to the game. The overall level design is a bit of a mixed bag, and sadly it's one of the things that felt a bit underdeveloped to me. The early levels in the game are really fun and really well designed, in my personal opinion. Levels such as the first act in the Weapon X facility, where you have to escape. That level is really intense and a bit twisted. As well as the Alkali Lake level, where Wolverine has to search the depths of a creepy underground military facility that has been taken over by a monstrous creature from his past, known as the Wendigo. That level is quite scary and extremely atmospheric. Some of the later levels, however, are just awful and unnecessarily awkward. The worst one by far being the Magneto level in the steel mill. Screw that level. So yeah, as great as the game's combat is, and as fun as it can be, the level design, sadly, is a bit of a mixed bag. And there are some extremely annoying difficulty spikes that will likely make you want to rage quit. There are also a couple of turret sections in the game, and these are pretty lame if truth be told, but they do add some variety, if nothing else. One of them is actually really challenging. There's also a level in the game where you operate drones, and sadly it's not as fun as it sounds, but I digress. The game also has several boss battles, and again these are a bit of a mixed bag. Some of them are okay and I didn't mind them, others are so unfairly difficult and awkward that they just serve as an annoyance. You take on several villains from the X-Men series. You take on Sabretooth twice. Speaking of Sabretooth, he serves as the game's primary villain. He basically stalks Wolverine the entire game, and shows up when you least expect him. He seems to just want to watch him die and prevent him from finding a cure. Seriously, Sabretooth is everywhere in this game.
You ain't even begun to hurt yet, short stuff.
His boss battles are okay and not too challenging, I didn't mind them. You also take on the Wendigo, in a battle that's difficult but not too difficult when you figure out his patterns. You take on Juggernaut, Magneto, and even Lady Deathstrike. The Deathstrike boss battle is pretty cool, however the Juggernaut battle is insanely hard and poorly designed, with little to no room for error. Really annoying boss battle. However, the worst boss battle by far is Magneto. The Magneto boss is one of those bosses that, while not too difficult to do, is just so awkward. It's one of them bosses where you have to walk along a walkway and jump on the boss, only to do a tiny bit of damage, then climb back up and do the whole thing again, while constantly getting ragdolled and thrown around and knocked to the ground and hit by floating debris. Again, it's not too difficult, it's just really annoying and really awkward. So yeah, the boss battles are a bit of a mixed bag. One thing I really like about the game is the overall visual style and aesthetic. The graphics are fantastic for 2003, and the character models look great. The game also has several cutscenes to convey the story, and these look great, and the voice acting is excellent.
I am far more powerful than you.
I didn't come this far to take a rain check, Magneto. I came to rumble.
Wolverine will meet several characters from the X-Men series along the way, such as Colossus.
I have been hired to, how do they say, enhance security.
Rogue.
Sugar? You look like something the cat dragged in.
Xavier, and Beast, as well as several others. And even Spider-Man makes a brief appearance at one point.
So I rode out here in the chartered bus along with the other superheroes who can't fly or teleport.
He's once again voiced by Reno Romano, reprising his roles from the PS1 games, which I also reviewed on here if you want to check them out, link in description. Yeah, the Spider-Man PS1 games are awesome, but I digress. So yeah, the game's graphics and presentation, as well as the cutscenes and character models, are awesome for the time. In addition to all this, the game has several pretty cool bonus features. For example, there are quite a few collectibles to find to unlock these features. For example, you can collect dog tags that unlock dog tag challenges. There are 3 of these: bronze, silver and gold. These are basically challenges that include speed and stealth. These are quite fun for a while. You also have several unlockable costumes. Some of these are based on the classic Wolverine comic outfits. You also have the X-suit from the X-Men 2 movie. You also have the costume from the game's intro. These can be unlocked by finding comics hidden throughout the game. Most of these are easy to find, but some of them are in obscure locations. Other items to find hidden around the game are cerebro files. These are character bios that can be viewed in the game's gallery. You get a short description of each of the game's characters. These bios are also narrated by Patrick Stewart, just like the ones in X-Men Next Dimension, from the previous year.
As the world inched irrevocably closer to the precipice of genetic war, Pyotr Rasputin stood his ground. The powerhouse of the X-Men, he used his mutant powers to protect those who had come to hate and fear his kind. But the cold organic steel into which the Russian-born Colossus could transform masked an artistic heart.
These are pretty cool and fun to listen to. You also have plenty of concept art to look at, and these look pretty cool too. You can also replay the game's cutscenes here. You even get some funny unlockable cutscenes too. You even get one where Mark Hamill is basically messing about in the recording studio.
It's quiet. Too quiet. I love the classics.
These were pretty funny in my opinion. Features like these in video games are always appreciated by me. The game also has a pretty awesome soundtrack. The game's main theme, for example, is epic and really suits Wolverine. I also love the music used in the levels, since each track seemed to suit the tone of each level perfectly. So yeah, the soundtrack is pretty great. And yeah, the game is great for the most part, and it has some awesome bonus features, as well as a ton of variety. Sadly though, the underdeveloped stealth mechanics, mixed quality of boss battles, and absolutely insane difficulty spikes here and there make the game a bit of a mixed bag, and it definitely could have been better in my opinion. The game's ending is a bit weird too. It has a bit of a sequel bait ending involving Apocalypse, Mr. Sinister and Omega Red, and sadly the sequel never came out, which is a bit of a shame since they had a few really good ideas here. And with a bit of polish and more experience, a sequel could have been great, but sadly we'll never know how it would have turned out. Nonetheless, the game is great for the most part, despite its flaws. I give X2 Wolverine's Revenge a solid 7 out of 10. A great game with some flaws. Thanks for watching guys, I really enjoyed replaying and reviewing Wolverine's Revenge. It's a blast from the past. Stay tuned for my next review where we're going to be looking at X-Men the official game. Let me know what you guys think. Thanks for watching and God bless.
Yeah, rubs me